In this video, I'm going to be showing you guys how to sew the pieces of an asymmetric hemline dress all together. In the previous video, I did the pattern drafting, so this video is going to be focused on the sewing. Basically, I used the patterns to cut out all the pieces, ensuring to add half an inch seam allowance where necessary. So next, I'll be sewing the darts of the main fabric and the darts of the lining fabric for the front and for the back pieces. So this is the front piece. After the darts have been sewn, I added a seam on the center front part just to give it a little bit more structure, and this is the back piece as well. I joined the dart for the main fabric and for the lining fabric and went ahead to turn it over. So basically for the front, when I sewed the darts on the main fabric and on the lining basically the same way, I'm going to place them right sides facing and sew from one end of the shoulder down the deepest point and right back to the other shoulder. So when I have sewn that down, the next step would be to attach the shoulder of the front to the shoulder of the back together, and it should look something like this when you have attached the shoulders together. Do note that my zipper is basically pinned down. I do not have any zip installed at this point. Then I'll be taking my body measurement, half of my body measurement on either side, and it should look something like this. I went ahead to overlock the edges just so it's nice and clean. Then we'll go ahead to press this down just so everything lays down really flat. So moving on to the lower part of this dress, I have all the pattern pieces laid out here. So what I'll be doing, I'll be joining my two center front pieces on the right side, then attach my two side front pieces to each side of the center front pieces on the right side, and as well as the center back and the side back. So I'll be joining all the pieces together starting from the center front and working my way down to the center back on the right side. So I'll be doing the same thing for the main fabric and on the lining fabric as well. After joining, it should look something like this. You can see all the seams are on the right side, and that's because we'll be creating passages for our boning later on. And when you have your passage created, it should look something like this. And in case you don't know how to create the passage for a boning, don't worry, I'll be showing you guys how to do it as well. So basically, after sewing each piece together like this, it's just basically bending it over to the other side or either side, bend the fabric over a bit and top stitch it down. So basically when you fold it over like this, you just create a stitch from top to bottom, and that is to create a passage for the boning. So you want to ensure that the passage is not too tight or too loose, just the right size of your boning. And for my lining, I will not be stop stitching. I just have one stitch to hold all the lining pieces together, and I'm just going to stop stitch the other part of this and bring it back for you guys to see. So after doing that, I went ahead to create markings along the center front and the side front pieces, just so I can, create extra passages for bonings, just because I want a little bit more structure. And to do that, I'll be cutting 1-inch straps with my fabric and just, stitching them down that those marked lines, and this is what it should look like. But if you're not willing, or if you do not want extra passages for boning, you can skip that part. Okay, so next up, I'll be attaching this lower part to the upper part of the dress which we made earlier. And to do that, you're just basically going to place your upper part, that's the bust part of this garment, to the lower part of the waist, and you want to ensure that it's facing the right side of the main fabrics, are facing the right side, or it's facing the right side of the main fabric, and the upper part is in between the waist part and the lining of the lower part. So it should look something like this when you sew, just so all the seams are hidden in between the main fabric and the lining fabric for this lower part. So do note that at this point the bottom seam is pretty open because I'll be attaching the boning before inserting or before closing that bottom seam. And to insert the boning, I'll be cutting a boning that is about 1 inch shorter than whatever measurement I have for each casing. And in this case, my boning casings were 5 inches long, so I'll be cutting a boning that is 4 inch long, and I'll be rounding off the tip like this before inserting into each case. So you want to ensure that it is rounded up on either side before inserting, just so it doesn't pierce through or rip through your fabric. And after inserting all the bonings, this is what it looks like. I close the bottom seam at this point, and now we'll be moving over to the lower part of the skirt. So for this part, I'm not turning any side inwards. I'm just placing the main fabric onto the lining fabric wrong sides, and I'm just going to sew all the way around, just to stitch the lining onto the main fabric. And this is what it looks like after it is stitched. I did the same thing for the back as well, basically stitching the lining onto the main fabric. Do note that there would be no darts on this garment, then on this lower part of the garment actually. Next up, I'll be taking half of my body circumference, my waist and my hip on this side of the fabric. So you want to ensure that whatever waist measurement you're using for this lower part is equivalent, or is the same as whatever you use for the upper part. Then the next step would be to attach the lower part to the upper part that we made earlier, and this is what it looks like at this point. Then I've decided to attach this black bias strap onto each boning casing. I'll be hand stitching this onto each boning casing just to make it a little bit more defined. You can skip this process if you wish, but this is what it looks like after hand stitching all the bias strap on each piece of the boning casing. Next up, we'll be moving over to the hem of this garment, and to create the hem, I cut a strap that is about 10 inches long, and I'll be attaching it or sewing it down through the entire hem of this garment from one end to the other end, and that would create the asymmetry or the frill at the bottom part of this dress. Then for the bust area, I'll be using this mesh net to close, not necessarily close, just right on top that bust area that's open, just so we don't have a lot of things revealed, or we don't have a lot of cleavage outside. So I'm just going to cut it over and stitch from one point to one point, and that is basically it for this tutorial, you guys. Like, there's no much to it. All right, so after attaching the sleeves, this is what it looks like, this is what the dress looks like. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section. To give this video a thumbs up if you learned something. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to share, subscribe if you haven't already, join the family, and turn on your post notifications so you'll be the very first to know when I upload a new video. So until next time, you guys, bye.